Welcome to part 2 of the Uncensored Library, where we go over information of the library has to offer. Today we are going to go over one of the more sensitive topics, which is currently in news: Russia. In the Uncensored Library. I think this has been more recently updated, so you guys are in for a treat. I will not be able to pronounce his name, so I will not try, as not to offend people. Russia is the World Press Freedom Index of 155th out of 180 countries. Since the large-scale attack on Ukraine in February 2022, there has been virtually no freedom of the media in Russia. Almost all independent media has been banned, blocked, and/or declared foreign agents, a status that has come with heavy bureaucratic hurdles and legal risks. At the aftermath of the invasion, the draconic laws were adopted, under which false information about the Russian army and discrediting of the armed forces and its operation is now punishable by up to 15 years in prison. As no media worker is safe from the threat of serious charges under this vaguely worded law, nearly all journalists working from independent media outlets were forced to flee abroad. Almost two-thirds of Russians get their news mainly from television, which is controlled by the state. Subjects such as homosexuality are off limits for this media. State TV insists to spread hatred against Ukraine in the West. The Kremlin massively tightened censorship on the internet websites and are often banned without a court order. Numerous international social networks like Facebook and Instagram are blocked. Violence against media workers is nearly punished. Nearly 40 media workers have been murdered for their work since President Putin took office. More than 20 are currently in prison. Read article from Baraka Journal in the middle of this room. This name, people of this end, is a small independent media outlet from Ekirsten. It was founded by journalist, cannot say it, this in February 2022. It covers the Siberian region of Ekirsten and Barakatin. The media has special focus on so-called cannot say this, the rural and often improvised Russia province, where there are no normal roads, electricity, or communication. Usually journalists don't report it, because they simply can't reach these areas. After the start of Russia's role aggression against Ukraine, the medium gained national prominence and relevance. This name has collected numbers of fallen Russian soldiers and reported on their funerals, where journalists were not welcome. According to research by this guy, most of the dead come from this end and Republican Dagestan in the Caucasus. This shows that many contract soldiers are recruited from the poorest regions of Russia. On April 15, 2022, the website was blocked by Russian media regulator Russia. Since then, the medium has always been accessible in Russia via VPN and continues to conduct investigations researching the journalist's text. The media embraces the banned word war in his text by the expression word banned by Romania. I did not know that some of that stuff was there, but okay. For now, go in the middle. And right here, expectations versus reality. Boris 2023. Vladimir Putin did not achieve his strategic goal of defeating the Ukrainian army and occupying Ukraine during the 2-week blitzkrieg. At the same time, at the Operation L, the Russian army, at the current kind of heavy losses, managed to retain much of what they had gained by the end of the first year of the war, namely almost all Lucas these names, and this is in part of this area. I'm sorry, I'm not really good at pronouncing these. As the land core to Crimea, the territories of these countries. Apparently, Putin has temporarily given up the idea of occupying all of Ukraine. His goal is now to seize the remaining Ukraine-controlled territories of the Dagestan region, after which Russia will try to conclude a long-term truce to digest what it has gained and try to reorganize the army and occupy arms for a new major war against Ukraine in a few years. If the ceasefire fails, Putin is prepared to wage a multi-year war of attrition, continue to the west. Congress resolved to help Ukraine over time, and Ukraine's resources to running out. According to General Staff AFU, from the beginning of the full-scale war until February 2023, the losses of Russia's regular army amounted to 143,680 killed. We assume the losses of Wagner and the Russian PME combined with the losses of the two army corps of the GNR and LNR are approximately 1.8 times less than the losses of the regular army. They can be estimated at 79,820 killed. And the total losses of the Russian side, 223,500 killed and 447,000 wounded, which gives a total of 670,500 people. The ratio of land armor losses, according to Auction Investigation website of February 10th, was 3-1-1 in favor of Ukraine. But it was considered a 4-1 ratio to be more representation than what it was before the massive Russian strikes of Ukraine's energy infrastructure began. In this case, the total number of dead and wounded in the ranks of AFU since the beginning of the war can be estimated to 167,600, including 41,900 killed. With its racial losses, the human resources in Russia and Ukraine are defeated in approximately the same proportion. The staff estimated that Russia has lost 3,316 tanks, 299 aircraft, and 287 helicopters since the start of the war. Data from the Oryx website, which takes into account only losses confirmed by video footage, is somewhat more modest. 1,746 tanks, 72 planes, and 77 helicopters. According to Oryx data, the Ukraine losses in hardware were 467 tanks, 58 aircrafts, all of them lost their lives, and 29 helicopters. If we take into account the quantity of combat-ready tanks the Russian army had before the invasion was from 3,000 to 3,300, then if Ukraine estimates are correct, during the year of the war, almost all of them were destroyed. And now the Russian army fights mostly with the tanks received from repair bases and preserved on the eve of the war. Ukraine had about 90 combat-ready aircraft. One can estimate how true statements of the Russian Ministry of Defense about destruction of the many as 386 Ukrainian aircraft are. After the start of the war, Ukraine received a number of disassembled aircraft ready for assembly. In addition, some aircraft that were not combat ready at the beginning of the war were repaired, but the AFU still have an accurate need to modern combat aircraft. The decision to resupply, which has not been made of the United States and its allies. On the other hand, I'm going to turn that volume because this needs a proper thing. On the other hand, before the start of the war, the number of combat-ready Russian aircraft that could be used against its Ukraine war was estimated as 300 machines. If we believe the data of the Ukraine general and staff, by now almost all these planes have been destroyed. However, experts estimate that Russia is using 700 to 800 aircraft, most of which are battlefield aircraft, against Ukraine. This indicates a serious underestimation of the potential of Russian combat aviation at the beginning of the war. So why did Putin and Russia command so miscalculate in their assessment of Ukraine's army ability to resist? I think that the fact that Germanos, Severino, and others, Russians, as well as many overwhelming majority of Russian fellows from Latinians and Cross, have only had colonial wars like the Chechen incident, the Five Days of Georgia, the War of Syria, and various kinds of peacekeeping operations played a role. Only a few of them, like Lieutenant General Roman Conrad, who died in a special military operation, had experience in 2014 to 2022 war in Donbass, which was more similar to the Korea War in natural combat operations, but it was not comparable to the scale. Therefore, the war in Ukraine was also viewed as another colonial war, only with a slightly larger number of participants. Most interesting is at first, the U.S. and its allies perceived the Russian-Ukraine war in approximately the same way. In any cases, the first deliveries of U.S. weapons to Kyiv, the Stingers, and the Javelins were roughly the same as deliveries of weapons to the Afghan Mujahideen to fight the Soviet intervention. These weapons were intended primarily for the guerrilla warfare Washington believed would break out in Ukraine, especially in cities. Only when it became clear that the Ukrainian army was holding out and the conventional major war was being fought did command begin to provide with heavy weaponry necessary for such a war. Russian generals and officers could do little to benefit from the experience gained. For example, in Syria, because the nature of resistance and the weapons used for it were quite different. In the AFU, most officers and generals have been ATO zone on rotation basis had combat experience much more adequate to the current war. In addition, the command, supply, and combat training systems of the AFU were largely rebuilt according to NATO standards. All this, along with much higher motivation of personnel, made it possible to resist Russian aggression. The AFU transition to combat defensive and liberation of Ukraine territory depend entirely on the pace of non-manipulation of Western arms deliveries at the same time, despite the declared belief in Ukraine victory, which Kyiv understands as reaching in 1991 better. Western leaders make somewhat strange statements. For example, French President Macron said that Russia's defeat should not lead to its collapse. He apparently referring to the collapse of the political regime. Macron thinks the Putin successor could be even worse than he is, and a possible breakup of Russia. But here's what we enter the realm of unpredictable. It's possible to foresee how when a military defeat may affect Russia's domestic situation, and no one today is willing to predict when the Russia-Ukraine war will end. Take the Soviet military intervention in Afghanistan as an example. It lasted 9 years and 2 months and ended in a defeat for Moscow. It was a typical colonial war, involved a very limited portion of the Soviet military power, and it seemed that the failure of Afghanistan campaign should not have seriously affected the sustainability of the communist regime in USSR. Nevertheless, just 2.5 years after the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, while Moscow-backed government was still in place, the communist regime in the USSR collapsed and the Soviet Union collapsed. As the last Soviet soldier crossed the Panjim River, no one foresaw what the defeat would entail. The Russia-Ukraine war is not by nature a colonial war, with the fifth countries providing military and aid to Ukraine. The current war is approaching World War III is important, but Russia is unlikely to endure for 9 years. I think Moscow will have to end it much sooner and not in its favor. That's the first book. Here's the second book. I will not be reading this one because I've read a lot and I'm not as good as reading as I realize as well as other ones, so I'll be just paging through this page. That is the second book. Tell me what you prefer me to do. Read or no? And that is the Russian-Ukraine War book readings of the Uncensored Library. This is in 1.16.5, the Uncensored Library, if you want to read it for yourself. Thank you for everyone for watching.